Thank you all, councillors. Thank you, staff members. Thank you, members of the public. Thank you all for joining us. I will declare this OCM open, and in doing so, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Noongar Wadandi people, and their continuing connection to the land, waters and community. We do pay our respects to all members of the Aboriginal community and to their culture, and to elders past, present and emerging. And would like to note any Indigenous who are joining us here or watching online, thank you all for joining us. There are no announcements from me, and we have just received an apology from Councillor Steele, who will not be joining us this evening. Everybody else is here. We have received one declaration of interest, councillors. That was from Councillor Andrew, which is highlighted there on 10.1.6. It is a impartial interest. Are there any other declarations of interest for tonight's agenda? That's great. Thank you. We have not received any public questions or responses to questions taken on notice. We have the previous minutes of the last council meeting. Is somebody happy to move that they are true and accurate record? Thank you, Councillor Quain. Seconded by Councillor Kozisek. Likely immediate debate, councillors. I'll put that. Thank you. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. And there are the minutes of the Policy and Review Development Committee there. Somebody happy to move that as well? Councillor Quain, thank you. Councillor Kozisek. Any debate? Put that. That's carried unanimously. Thank you. I don't believe we received any petitions, councillors. There are no presentations, but we have had 3 requests for deputations on item 10.4.2. The names are there in front of us, John Evans, Ingrid and Jane. I'll put that we are happy to hear those speak. Those in favour of that? That's carried. I just ask we put that one on silent, thank you. But for those speakers, I believe you are all familiar with the process. When we get to your item, we will ask you to come up and speak, and you have 10 minutes. Thank you. So, councillors, dealing with the agenda tonight at this stage, coming out for discussion at this stage is 10.3.2. That does require nominations for that board. And 10.4.1, which has 10.4.2, he did correct me of that minute, but I will just make that 10.4.2, which does obviously have those deputations. So 10.3.2 and 10.4.2 are the 2 at this stage out for discussion. Are there any others? If that's the case, is somebody happy to move the remainder are carried on block? Thank you, Councillor Steck, seconded by Councillor Andrew. I'll put that. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, councillors. So for those who are joining us, any of those items that aren't coming up for discussion have now been passed as written. 10.3.2 is the appointments to the Morrissey Homestead Board. How do we go, councillors? Do we have anybody who was able to nominate for this? Councillor Andrew?
Sorry, Mr Mayor, it's got me down as a financial interest for some reason.
Yeah, that's an impartial interest. Thank you. Oh, that's not the one you have an impartial interest, is it, Councillor Andrew? No, that's fine, no interest. Councillors, did we have anybody who was was wanting to nominate to be a member? It's a Monday at 12 o'clock. Yeah, I think that was the Councillor Gasser. Happy to nominate? Thank you. Councillor Gassop is nominated as a member.
Mr Mayor.
Just stand, thanks, Councillor Steck.
Sorry, thank you. Just because of the time frame on the Mondays, sometimes Mondays can be difficult and they don't really have access to Zoom. So I'd be happy to go on there, but some meetings on Mondays I just simply wouldn't be able to attend.
Well, if Councillor Gassop has indicated to be a member, are you happy to be a deputy member, Councillor Steck?
Yes.
Or the other way around.
Other way around?
Yeah.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Steck? Do you want to be a member, and then when you can't make it, you can request Councillor Gassop be your deputy?
Yeah.
I'm happy with that. Do we have a mover for that?
So moved.
Thank you. Councillor Gassel, happy to second. Thank you. Like to be in debate on that, councillors? I'll put that. That's carried. Thank you, and we'll let them know. Thank you very much, councillors, for that commitment. Appreciate that. Councillor Turner?
I'll just say, the Morrissey House is the one out in Leschenal, out Eaton, Australian area, not the one in town.
We'll get all those details through. Thanks, Councillor Turner. Thank you. 10.4.2, right. So, councillors, we do have some deputations in order that appeared before us. We'll ask, I think John was the first one up. Yes, John? Mr Evans? Welcome back, and you have 10 minutes. And maybe if you could move that microphone and make sure that's in front of you, because this is obviously going online, so we want to make sure everyone can hear. And we'll give you a little bit more time, it's okay.
Gotcha. Yes, good evening,
Thank you.
Mayor and esteemed councillors. My name's John Evans. I hail from Scotland. We don't have a welcome to country in Scotland. We reserve something called the Glaswegian kiss for those south of the border, which you might. In fact, my school motto is Ad Astra per Adva, which means to the stars through the clouds, and that's probably because there are a lot of clouds in Scotland, unlike here in Bunbury. So I'd like to talk about balance. I found this little badge here that apparently stands for nature, knowledge, wisdom, which I think is important in this day and age to understand. So the question I'm addressing or aiming to address is one of sustainability. And with reflection, hang on, that is actually the last slide. Sorry, it doesn't seem to have all the slides. I can talk without the slides if you like, but...
Two slides.
No, those about 20 slides. Okay, one. Okay. This is, just to show you, when I moved to Bunbury, this is a view from Largs in Scotland, the west coast. Similar but a lot colder. And this here is a view, so in Scotland where I come from, energy was a big problem back in the 1970s, and it's become a big problem again. In the distance there, top left of the screen, you'll see a nuclear power station. That's Hunterston Nuclear Power Station. It's no longer in operation. It was in operation for 60 years, producing about 1.5 gigawatts of power in that time. We also have a lot of windmills along the coast. Now, I've been talking through, this is what I found when I came to Bunbury. The beauty of this area is almost unimaginable. And I've had visitors coming here that can hardly believe the view, what it's like. And I notice when I walk into Bunbury at night time, or in the evening, sunsets, there are dozens of people lined up, elderly people, disabled people, lots of people, single parents with their children, to watch the sunset. We need energy. There's no doubt that we need energy. The total Australian energy consumption is about 250 million megawatt hours. That's 9.3 megawatt hours per person, or about 27 kilowatt hours per day. So we need a lot of energy. And as more people come into the country, as AI takes off, AI is remarkably consuming of energy. So we're going to need a lot of energy, there's no doubt. AI, in fact, the requirements for AI energy is going up tenfold every year. Business and industry need about 90 million megawatt hours in Australia. And Australia is not a particularly industrialized country. In the UK, the energy requirement industry to household is about 70-30. So most of the energy requirements are industrial and not household. So more views of the incredible beauty of Bunbury. which I think it's worth just pointing out. Even the dogs love the view. So that's where the proposed wind farm is. Now, I'm not aiming to speak for or against wind or any particular form of energy. This is not really what I'm saying. Because when you do that, barriers go up. People don't use their brain, they don't use their mind, they don't think. I don't know what you know about the various energy forms. You may know a lot more than I do. I don't know, but it's worth giving it some consideration. So this is taken from the brochures. This is what the wind farm will look like, the reduced level of wind farm that will look like. Approximately 760 wind turbines, 15 megawatts per turbine, about 115-foot blades. 11.4 gigawatts in total is the aim, which is, if you wanted to, that's about 4,000 kilometers squared is the area. Now, what I would suggest, a short version of this is, if I don't reach the end of this, just think about the future. There are an awful lot of wind farm. Offshore wind farming is a valuable resource because the wind is constant compared to land resources, but it's harder to get the energy ashore, obviously. The issue is that you would need, so that wind farm will produce 0.00456%, a tiny amount of the total energy requirement that Australia will need. You would need 22,000 similar wind farms to service the current energy needs of Australia, just the current, and this is going up and up and up all the time. So don't be against wind. I'm not against wind. It's a useful form of energy. I believe that we probably need a mixture to serve the community. What does a wind farm look like? Well, this is not the wind farm because it hasn't been built yet. And it's certainly not at 42 kilometres away, which is what it's purported to be from Bunbury. And in fact, this is taken online for what it would look like, and you will struggle to see at 20 miles or 32 kilometres the windmill there. But notice how these pictures are always taken. They're taken in the middle of the day. So this is what you're looking at. I'm sure you're all familiar, but if you're not, and for those who aren't, the total height is 268 metres. The hub height is 150 metres, blade length 118 metres, and above sea level. Okay, so if you look online, you will see the distance to her. Will you see these things from the shore? There's a question. Well, the previous slide would suggest no. If you look at an online calculator, distance to horizon, so you're on the shore looking out to sea, okay, for 150 meters, you will see that you would need to be almost 44 kilometers away to not see. That's the height of the hub. For the height of the blades, you would need to be 56.5 kilometers away. At 42 kilometers on the right, you will see anything above 138 meters at 0.44. Now, as I said, it's a bit confusing because the last slide didn't tend to let you see anything. But just to remind you, this is taken last week. Fishermen enjoying the sunset. What you'll notice about this is that, unlike the previous slides, this is with the sun behind. Now, I have two concerns, as well as a lot of positives for the wind farm, because it will produce quite a lot of energy. It is a useful form of collecting energy. But I do have some doubts, and my biggest single fear, in fact, is that once a wind farm gets built, and there's pushback from all the other communities around Australia, as we've already seen there is, those people who don't push back at all will have the biggest further expansion. Now, I think Bunbury's biggest natural resource, in many ways, you may disagree, is its natural beauty. If that is reduced by an ever-increasing wind farm, and so what I would suggest to you is if you have a wind farm, be very careful that it's certainly known exactly how many windmills are going to be moving into the future. Be aware that windmills aren't all without problems. Beware of the politician, okay? They will tell you anything that you want for their own reasons, right? because that's how I see some of those politicians. We have a saying in Scotland, and that's don't feed the seagulls. And the reason is because when you feed seagulls, when you stop feeding them, they attack you, which is not particularly pleasant. So be careful of that. There's lots and lots of information online. I'm almost coming to the end of this. So there's lots of information online that will tell you, for example, that land wind farms in the US, study done, showed that to supply the US with enough energy would actually raise the temperature of the mainland US by about 1/4 degree C by wind mixing. So it's not all roses. Also, you've got to look at the people who are producing the windmills. This is probably too small to read, but it says by 2020, demand for balsa wood was outstripping supply. This is balsa wood that they need to produce the blades and the wind farms, okay? The indigenous communities, as always, were not consulted, and logging has gone on, whereas demand is outstripping supply. So there are hidden issues with wind farming. That doesn't mean to say it's a bad idea, just that you've got to take it into consideration. Each 15 megawatt blade turbine, according to this article, has 900 litres of oil in it, which is why, in fact, I don't believe that. I think it's about 1/3 of that, to be honest. But it is why occasionally you will see these dramatic pictures. I'm almost finished. Almost finished, yeah. So this was the Drawson, where I come from. This is the fire that they had there, and that's due largely, it will tell you online that due to lightning strikes, but this was actually a failure of the wind farm. It's not common, right? Maybe one a month around the world this happens to. When it has, it's fairly dramatic, okay? Bear in mind, in our search for sustainability, all of the batteries, for example, we use, they're a good idea, don't get me wrong, but they do have a cost. Cobalt, for example, the cobalt mines and other people pay those costs. And then, of course, there's the sea life. Fishing, the whales, who knows what the infrasound that the windmills will produce. It's all very well saying half the number, but that doesn't get rid of the infrasound. And sound travels 5 times faster under the water than it does on land. So I'm just saying, think about it a little bit. Not don't use it. We need energy. It's going to have to come from many different sources, right? But please think about the downsides as well as the upsides so we don't get entrenched in one particular opinion. That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Thank you. Ingrid.
I'll just change my glasses because otherwise I can't see what I've written.
No problems.
Okay. I read through the list of advocacy topics. They are good, very good, and they have a chance of success since they seem to fall into the policies accepted by state and federal government. But they leave out the very poorest, the most vulnerable people here in Bunbury, the homeless. The traditional homeless we have seen around Bunbury for years, but now there are so many more. I made a trip around Bunbury some nights ago. I found more than 400, close to 450 people sleeping rough. Not couch surfing, sleeping in cars, tents, or just on the ground. I have later discovered that there are many more. One man told me about climbing onto flat roofs to be a bit safer at night, and he said he was not alone. Others told me about tents and cars in areas I hadn't thought about. They were old people, young people, newly released prisoners, women fleeing domestic violence, and entire families. There were people without a job and people who went to work or school every day pretending they had a normal address. Many of them had rented for years, but when they could no longer follow the increases in rents, they became homeless. The first advocacy topic on your list mentions housing, but in such a discreet way. You need to add another first topic, the one about an emergency housing and a shelter, so people can have a night's sleep without fear. You have already mentioned this before and voted on it. In 2021, Council strategy says that provision of crisis accommodation is still very important. In 2024, you have voted to form a committee to find solutions, homelessness and housing solutions working group, a committee that should include ordinary people as well as politicians and bureaucrats. I have applied but never heard back. Is the committee fully formed and working? In 2024, you also voted that you were favourable to a shelter. You have contacted state government. Minister Carey, Minister for Housing, Lands, Homelessness, on the 12th of June about it. Have you had any answers from them? I sincerely hope that you have not abandoned these aims. I do a vigil in front of Dom Panchi's office together with friends, and you're all welcome to join me every Monday afternoon, 2 to 4. And I have a poster that I use so people know why I'm there. When I talk with people, they sometimes say I should sit in front of this building instead. And I tell them there is no need, since you agree with me there is a need for a shelter, and that you are trying to make the state government helps pay for it. I hope I'm not telling them something that is not true. There is not one solution to the housing problem we have. There are many, and they must work together. The obvious one is that we need more permanent housing built. Not only McMansions, but especially simple and affordable housing. Houses for single people and couples, as well as for families. I would love the city to be landlords. That is a major surgery to fix the problem. I know it can be done. I've seen this success elsewhere. A shelter and other crisis accommodation is the band-aid needed so that the patient doesn't bleed to death waiting for the surgery. You see, that's why I have a band-aid on the poster I'm using. When Minister Carey tells me that there will be permanent housing for all these people in a few years, my only answer must be that many of them will have very permanent housing for eternity by the rigors of rough sleeping long before their permanent lodgings are built. Please add an advocacy topic that communicates the city's concern for the poorest and most vulnerable. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mayor, councillors, thank you for the opportunity to speak at this meeting. In prefacing this address, I wish to thank Ingrid, Gary, Erica, Jonathan and friends who have maintained their vigil for the homeless here in Greater Bunbury. The number of whom have significantly increased since we last addressed the council on this issue. Early last week, different friends, coincidentally, sent me 2 relevant documents to this address. This notice of meeting and agenda with particular reference to 10.4.2 and the City of Bunbury 2021 Local Housing Strategy. I first looked at the housing strategy and noted that the Council's concern for the escalating housing stress, particularly for, quote, low-income renters, low-income households with children, older people renting, and people with disabilities. And it goes on to say 48% of low-income households are in rental stress, and that 98% of open market rentals were not affordable for a person on minimum wage. That was 3 years ago. The 2021 strategy went on to say that provision of crisis accommodation is still important to ensure that there is adequate accommodation for people waiting for social housing. The City is supportive of alternatives and, I add, looks forward, and then the state government responding via crisis accommodation options. End of quote. It is evident that the Council continues to feel the pressure of that need, as exemplified in its voting to advocate to the state government for a quote-unquote homeless shelter on the 2nd of April. You have certainly walked the talk of the 2021 strategy by actively pushing for state government support of crisis accommodation, which you rightly recognise is the primary responsibility of the state government. I understand the Council is still waiting on the Minister for a response. I then looked at the strategy advocacy priorities in this document. They reflect adequately the responsibilities of local government. They have clear and specific goals that aim to shape the lives of Bunbury residents. I note the Council lists as its first priority to advocate, quote, state and federal governments to commit direct investment into housing options within the City of Bunbury, including where state government funded projects impact on housing availability in Bunbury. Now, in the interest of making that first priority even more robust, and given the evident public interest in addressing homelessness in Bunbury, I am here to request councillors to consider including an additional advocacy topic, one that is more generic in its thrust, a strategy that signals the importance of advocating for the capacities and funds to ensure that all in our community can prosper. This additional advocacy topic would, furthermore, fit with the Council's and Bunbury's aspiration to become a progressive city. To achieve that aim, Bunbury will be required to produce adequate means to ensure the provision of services necessary for our community to function and its residents to thrive, especially the most vulnerable and increasingly the middle class who are being challenged by rising costs. To that effect, the advocacy topic would aim to signal to state and federal governments, and perhaps also to corporations, that the Council has a priority intention to seek after whatever logistical and financial means are necessary from the state and federal governments for shaping Bunbury as a sustainable, inclusive and just city, and that would include the poorest and the most vulnerable in our community. Thank you.
Oops. Okay, we're online. Thank you, Jane. Thank you for the speakers. Looks like the mic is back working. Thank you. And the question was raised there twice. I did just let a couple know, so I'll just let all elected members know as well. Minister Kerry has responded to that letter. It came to my office about 30 minutes ago. So I haven't digested or read that yet. Right, councillors, we do have an executive recommendation in front of us. I'll get this to the table first. I believe there might be a few questions, including mine. Do I have a mover to this? Councillor Andrew? Councillor Ramesh? I believe there may have been a couple of questions. If not, is there any questions? Councillor Quinn?
Thank you, Mayor. Can you please remind me, what are the top priorities the community expressed in the Market Community Scorecard?
CEO, do you have the answer in front of you?
Thank you, Mayor. I might ask the Director of Corporate and Community, because she's probably more familiar with that. As you've elected members are aware, we have, and I did send out an email on Friday that sort of tried to link the advocacy priorities with all of the things that we considered as part of that, including the Vision Day, the CEO KPIs, the regional priorities from SWALGA, and the state government priorities. But I also think they're consistent with the market survey stuff, but I'll let the Director of Corporate and Community add.
Thank you for the question. I agree with what the CEO said, and I'll take it on notice, and then we'll get back to you with a formal response with the details. Don't know it off my heart now.
Perhaps just a follow-up question, CEO, and it probably ties into that as well, about obviously there's advocacy topics here which, as you've just outlined, there's some background information provided. These aren't the only advocacy pieces that we obviously have, and some of that documents to be done. Is there another way to potentially address some of the advocacy pieces that we are doing away from this report, and maybe how this report come together, and what other options there are to look at some of those advocacy pieces?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Absolutely. So, as you know, we did hold a workshop, and the documentation was provided to elected members. I did do a further email that talked about the fact that this is not the only things that the city does, and that there is a whole lot of other work that goes on operationally every day around, so if you think about one of the community survey, the market survey was around community safety, and we do a significant amount of work in the community safety space through the working group SEGRA with the police, as the Mayor and I meet every month. So there's lots of things we do outside of these things. These things were intended to be linked to the priorities that came out of the Vision Day, that linked to the discussions that we've had probably since in my time of being here, and positioning ourselves so that we can lobby hard for some of those key priority projects that are linked in both the state and federal election. As you're also aware, we do have the Homeless and Housing Working Group, and that has had 2 meetings, and we are at the next meeting going to discuss the community representation, because we want to be quite clear about the skills that we need in terms of that group. There's lots of work that's going on there about housing, and understanding all of the work that we're doing in terms of housing across the city. As elected members are aware, we talked about last week 3,000 to 4,000 homes that we're working on over the next 5 years, and that's city land. That's stuff that we can do, but it's also, more importantly, some of the land that's private investment or state government land. Next week, in a couple of weeks' time, I've got the Department of Communities coming down here to meet with us about a lot of their land holdings that are within the city, to see how we can partner with Department of Communities to start to address and move forward on some of their land holdings. So there's a significant amount of work, and probably, Mayor, to answer your question, there's probably a further report I could bring back to council that just sort of summarises some of those other advocacy pieces on top of these key strategic things that are really about positioning the city. We've got, the Innovative Industries of the Future Forum shortly. We've got a state and federal budget, and it's about developing some collateral to put the city the best foot forward in the budget submissions are four priorities that we've already discussed around this table. So if there was a need for a further report just that summarises some of that advocacy, the other advocacy work, more than happy for that to be provided to elected members.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Thank you. Thank you, Mr CEO, for the valued contribution that you just explained. However, question, could I actually include in the first priority in the advocacy, including homelessness, because it is such an important issue, and I don't want to debate it yet, so I just want councillors to consider, Mr Mayor, can I include it?
I'll just see, where would your wording be, councillor Steck? Is it just adding in enabling housing options in Bunbury, including
Homelessness, yes, yep,
I think that amendment's not changing the
substantive
Yes,
motion.
the standard motion, it's not changing the intent, if the CEO doesn't believe that's in changing the intent.
Sorry, CEO, I would have thought we could probably, the way that the strategic advocacy priority has been worded, I think gives us that broader intent. I think if you look at the objectives and the outcomes, maybe that's where you can include. I mean, we are looking at all housing options, and as some of the councillors who are part of the Homeless and Housing Solutions Working Group, the mix and the diversity of housing for a number of sites is all part of that. If we can, a large part of what we're trying to do is ensure that we've got appropriate development that gives us diversity, that perhaps starts to move the dial in terms of some of the housing stock, and perhaps gets people out of larger homes into smaller homes, etc., and starts to provide more options for houses. So I think it's in there. It's up to elected members about whether they want to.
Whether we change it. Councillor Steck, given that answer, I'm just thinking, which you may not, because changing part of the report obviously changes things. With your indulgence, potentially a part 2, which asks the CEO to bring back a report, in particular on the homelessness advocacy work happening. That way we can have a look at that particular item directly, and I'm sure, given we've already done a lot of that, that can probably be done for the next round. Is that something you'd be happy to potentially include as part of your amendment, rather than changing the report itself, updating the executive recommendation for a part 2, which requests the CEO to bring back a report on the homelessness advocacy?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. However, I also wanted to include on 1, 2, 3, the fourth point, change of wording there also, which is living and working for the livability, which was to include safety, and I know that we're doing a lot there, and I know that the CEO gave a great reasoning. However, I also wanted to put in, which is including revitalising the CBD there too. So I do have a couple of questions to add wording into this report.
Sure, I think, as I see, that's what I'm just trying to avoid, the councillor Steck. I think changing significant amount to the reports obviously is going to require just an alternative motion rather than amendment. That's why I'm just trying to help here get this in where it may be able to be picked up as amendment. So it could, if you're talking about some of those issues which the CEO has clearly addressed, that's where I'm suggesting a part 2. If we're having something back for the next round, we'll potentially address some of these issues you're raising.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. But then I also have the last point, which I have questions. Leading tourist assets into one location. What is that one location?
Councillor Steck, I think you're going to have significant changes to this particular motion. So given that, I'm going to be suggesting maybe it's going to be best that you speak against this motion, because there are significant changes there.
Well, can I just please
So you can ask those questions, yep, sure. We
Yeah,
might just remove
answer,
that
please.
right now. We'll remove that amendment, minute taker. Maybe just, it may come back. Question on tourism, CEO?
So thank you, Mayor. Again, this was done in the council workshop that we had, I think, about 3 or 4 weeks ago. So this is a culmination of all of the input from elected members. We have talked about, and Councillor Steck would be aware of obviously the draft tourism plan, which does talk about the potential for a tourism precinct, and with some of those projects that are listed in the broader document. So that was that was discussed, and the wording was agreed at the workshop. So that's probably as much, Mayor, as I can say. Sure.
Yes, I'm aware of that. Thank you for the response, Mr CEO. However, I am concerned with the assets in one location because I.
Councillor Steck,
is
there's a
There
question
is
there.
a question, and the question is, it was informed to me that that was going to move the Bird Wildlife Park into that Kambana section. Is that accurate, and is that true?
Councillor Steck, there's a background documents here that have a huge amount of resources on what we're at, but that's not one particular thing. CEO?
Thank you, Mayor. Again, that's the potential relocation of the wildlife park is something that this council has discussed. There's nothing certain in there. What I want to do with the wildlife park is make that work better, and that either works better in its current location with further investment around it, or we look at other options for what we do with that asset and maybe partnerships. There's also been discussion about whether that could fit over in Mangrove Cove, and as you know, there's discussions around, the potential for a cultural centre to be over there. There is enough land that's over there to potentially do that, but there's lots of work that needs to be done for that to be a reality.
Any further questions? Councillor Quine?
Is it possible to have a second point to that motion? Something that speaks to the CEO, shares these advocacy items with the groups that the city subscribe or members of?
Mr. CEO, can I just have a quick...
Okay, Councillor
Sorry.
Steck, we'll deal with one thing at a time, please, Councillor Steck. So you're asking for amendment. I'll just get it up first. It looks like these advocacy priorities are shared with groups as cities and members. Let's just have a look at it first. So do you have any definition around that, Councillor Quine?
Bunbury Geographic Economic Alliance, the Regional Capitals WA, Regional Capitals Australia, Southwest Walga, Bunbury Geograph Walga.
I think the report talks about councils' different alignments, so I would suggest that's already been picked up in the principle. Any advocacy is part of that, but I might let the CEO respond.
Thank you, Mayor. I think, again, if you look at the advocacy document and how we've tried to lay that out, we have tried to link the priorities that we've been discussing as a group for some time with all of the other things, including the KPIs that have been set for me as CEO, the Vision 2040, the SWALGA regional priorities and the state government priorities. None of this, so it's really trying to show the alignment with all of those things, and that was the essence of the workshop that we did 3 weeks ago. So would we share these? Some of the others, like the other councils that are part of the SWALGA zone, would be well aware of some of the priorities. We're careful not to overlap. We're careful to make sure that we link our priorities and that we're clear on what the City of Bunbury is going for versus the wider region versus some of the other groups like BGEA, RA, industry, largely an industry group who will, primarily be concerned with a lot of the state's infrastructure and the priorities around that. So we're simply trying to put into a document the key things that we know that we've discussed, that ultimately as CEO I need to put into finalised business cases and prepare collateral that we can then start to use to advocate strongly for the things that we think are important for this city.
Just based on that and based on the rules around amendments, Councillor Quine, this is our priority, so we can't govern the other groups, so I probably can't accept that amendment in this format. The CEO has indicated that we will be sharing it with other groups, but it certainly goes away from the format of this particular process. These are our priorities, not other groups' priorities. Councillor Steck.
I will probably leave it for debate, thank you.
Was there any other questions? Councillor Gassett?
So several questions, but I'll go one by one, Mr. Mayor. Are these our priorities? Are these our strategic advocacy priorities, underlying priorities?
CEO?
Thank you, Mayor. Again, I'll just refer back to the workshop that most of the elected members attended. This is The city has had advocacy priorities, and they had them for the last 12 months, and the process was for us to review. I think last time we had 7 strategic advocacy priorities. We've now, through the workshop, suggested 5, and that's what we're looking to endorse through this process. So they are part of the city's strategic advocacy priorities so that we can, as I said, start to prepare some of the things that we need to put our best foot forward in both the state and federal budgets. We're also going to have, 300 to 500 delegates here for a pretty important conference in Bunbury, and we get the chance to, to talk through our advocacy priorities and our major projects. So it's all linked. Again, that was the purpose of the workshop, to demonstrate the linkage between all the things that I've been doing since in the last 10 months.
So in short, that was yes to the priorities, but they're not all the advocacy pieces.
Okay. Is the extrinsic materials or the background information, is that available to the public so we can be transparent, so they can have input?
That's what I was trying to get at the previous amendment, Councillor Gassett, and we might want to have another go. There's clearly obviously information there that I think we should be discussing, especially in some of those parts. But I suppose the rest of the information, CEO, was the other document circulated. Is that for public consumption at this stage?
I would say not at this stage, but might take that on notice, Mayor.
Some of the other questions overlap other councillors' comments. Why can't we put homelessness and emergency shelter in that first item? Does it drastically alter the advocacy piece, considering we are talking about the extrinsic information highlights it anyway? So why can't we put it on there? Why the reluctance?
I asked the CEO if we could include that piece as an amendment. The CEO's indicated it's up to us to indicate. I mean, that's where we're trying to get wording, but obviously in the previous conversation we went around a little bit. So if you're happy to propose some kind of amendment, then we'll have to look at that, how the wording is. And of course, when we're looking at changing a number of parts of where we're at in there, that's going to be obviously a significant change. So happy to have a look. What I was looking to do previously, in particular what has been discussed around homelessness and housing, is to potentially get some of that information around for the next meeting, but happy to take any suggestions you may have, Councillor Gassett.
Same question on the 4th item. Why cannot we put safety as part of that? Is there a reason why there was reluctance on that?
I think the issues around these high-level positions, Councillor Gassett, and that's talking about, do we then open up, we then obviously had a number of different questions in there. If we accepting one part of different wording, where do we end and where do we stop on that? As the CEO's now explained a couple of times, these advocacy topics have been discussed with council level, and what we agreed from, you're aware of the background information to those. That's what we've come up with, and that's what council has determined. That's what council will determine tonight.
Mr Mayor, can we put all these separate? And can I also move an amendment from your suggestion previously that we ask the CEO to bring back a report in the next round?
Cool. We can.
For all these advocacy things? So.
I don't think we can particularly take each of the advocacy topic because this does say council endorses the City Bunbury strategic advocacy priorities. So I'd be suggesting that if there's one that you're really against, you may speak against the actual motion, and then if we need that alternative there. But if you're happy to have an amendment that part 2 request the CEO to do this, and then there's potentially an opportunity to ask for any further details on reports from that, it might be a good opportunity, and I don't think that's a substantive change. And I would just ask the CEO if we can bring that initial motion, if you still had it. Thank you. When there was a mention around homeless advocacy and safety. Is that fine? Now, CEO, do you think that is a significant change to the intent of this executive recommendation?
Thank you, Mayor. No, I'd be, as I said earlier, happy to for that second point.
Right. Given before we do that, is the mover and seconder happy to include that as part of the substantive motion? Councillor Andrew, Councillor Metz, if that's the case, we can include that as part of the substantive motion. Stephanie?
May I ask a question? Please excuse my voice. Did you not say that you just received a letter from the Minister and you haven't had time to digest or read that? Might there be something in that would impinge on what we do next rather than go ahead now without knowing what the contents of the letter are?
Thank you. I'd imagine it will come into this report. As you're aware, we've already written that letter, so that's already part of the advocacy we can do. I would hope that the CEO will prepare something with the key initiatives that are already in place, and then obviously council can probably have a further debate on those particular issues about what may be next. But yes, Councillor Smith, you are correct, and if able to, we'll probably be providing that response in that report. Councillor Gass, further questions?
Yes, regarding item 2, or the second advocacy. Given that we've had a pretty substantial presentation from one of the deputations on the windmills, I'm just wondering what our position is and whether we should be considering the comments made tonight in taking a position, if we are going to take a position on wind farms.
Yeah, Councillor Gassab, I think at this stage it's a little bit too early, and we haven't been asked to make comment by anyone at this stage on wind farm. Right now, obviously that's a federal government issue. They are currently going through the process of requesting social licences, which is obviously asking all the proponents to put in their requests, which from what I understand is due in the end of October. The federal minister will then determine which proponents get a social licence to start their process, which will be decided sometime next year. In that report, it talks about what they're going to do with local governments in terms of collaboration during that process. So at this stage, the city doesn't have a position because we haven't been asked, and we would obviously need to extensively discuss that as elected members and with our community during that process over the next, which will be happening in the next year.
In that case, what engagement have we been having with some of these proponents of this wind farm? Have we had any engagement with either advocates for it or advocates against it, or government departments? BGEA, for example?
So we haven't, the city has not been in a position to talk with any of some of the proponents have requested meetings with the CEO and myself. I'm no longer meeting with any of them until we have a position. I went along to the wind farm presentation that the federal government ran at Breck as a interested ratepayer. But at this stage, there's been no formal positions or discussions with any of the proponents.
Are we going to take a position on this?
I'd imagine we will have to at some stage.
Just finally, Mr Mayor, the other deputation suggested an additional item about advocating to the state and federal about seeking whatever logistic means are required from the state and federal government to make this a just, inclusive city, including especially the vulnerable. I'm just wondering if there's any support for adding a separate one here, considering homelessness is probably one of the biggest issues, and in addition to that, whether we can include domestic violence as the key cause, number one cause of homelessness.
Sure. Councillor Gassab, might help you out if we just include regarding homelessness, social wellbeing, help me out there. I don't think we should narrow it too much. So given we're getting a report on homelessness, but around other social, help me out there, CEO, got any wording for me? I want to say social issues, but issues isn't really the right word.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll just try and think about a word. I get the intent, and what we will do is, when I prepare the report, is try and bring all the elements of all the things we're doing from a, to assist in that social responsibility, space. So as you know, there is lots, and there's probably lots that we don't communicate that we are doing, but that'll be the essence of the report.
Yeah, with that, Councillor Gasson, you want it? I think the CEO, and it's on the public record, you have that word.
Yeah, it would be nice to put in domestic violence somewhere in there. It is probably the biggest issue in Australia, and it affects homelessness.
Mover, you happy to include that? Homelessness, domestic violence, and safety advocacy. Second. Thank you. Okay. How are we going, councillors? Any other questions? Councillor Turner?
I'm just wondering how the CEO prepares a report on domestic violence. Sorry.
Yeah, so it's just around, it's the whole, obviously, we managed to get the wording exactly right, but the CEO to prepare a report on what advocacy we're doing in those pieces. So we might just need to get that reworded slightly, obviously not what he's doing. It's the city's advocacy in the following areas. Thank you. Further question? Yeah, Councillor Andrew.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and councillors, and thank you for those who gave deputations tonight. Usually I'm always, I guess, supportive of deputations when we come in and we're discussing homelessness, and I do thank Ingrid and Jane for their comments tonight. However, the most important part about this item is the title, which is City of Bunbury's Strategic Advocacy Priorities. They're the strategic priorities. They're not the priorities of the city and all the priorities of the city, but these are the strategic ones. And the reason they're strategic and laid out the way they are is, as Ingrid pointed out, they're also aligned with state government policies and federal policies, because we're trying to be strategic here to get the best outcomes that we can, especially in the election cycle. Housing is the cause of a large amount of homelessness in the city at the moment. Housing, if we could fix the housing tomorrow, if we could bring about a whole range of different types of housing, a whole range of housing options, a large part of our homeless situation would go away. But homelessness isn't the only issue, Mr Mayor and councillors. It's also the cost of living crisis, which is affecting more people than homelessness in our city. The crunch, the amount of people are paying for rentals. That's why it's important that we align these strategic priorities with state government policy. We know that their policy around housing first, and whether or not we agree with it, that's another discussion. But these are about giving us the best chance to get the best outcomes for the city and get real changes. We've invested a huge amount of time, and we continue to support, this council continues to support homeless. We have a homelessness working group. Tonight, earlier, we just approved rate exemption for another 2 properties for Southwest Refuge, providing emergency accommodation for women and children. We give up over $1.6 million a year in rate exemptions throughout the city to over 1 in 40 properties, with a large majority of those providing housing for elderly, for people who are homeless, for people who are struggling, for all parts of society. Not many other councils of our size can say that they give up $1.6 million a year in rates, with a large majority of that going into this area. We belong to all the homeless working groups. Again, let's come back to the outcomes we're trying to achieve. And the best outcome we can achieve is keeping a narrow focus, is giving ourselves a really good chance in this election cycle to get real outcomes, to fix the housing issue, which hopefully then is going to have those knock-on effects, and we can actually make a difference and have more impact for housing. If we go too broad and we have too many and we throw the darts against the wall, we may not hit any bullseyes. But let's take the strategic approach. We acknowledge there is a housing issue. That's why we talk about housing options. We know the state government's not going to support an emergency shelter. And if we put it in here again and we keep going down that track, we're not going to get the things we ask for. We're not going to get investments to help get Chilwell Brook underway. We're not going to get investment and hopefully getting some of our other land released to build more houses and to continue to put downward pressure on the cost of living crisis and bring about good resolutions and good outcomes to housing. So I'm pleased to ask you to include, there's great advocacy pieces here over a whole range, but as you know, I'm very passionate, especially thank you for bringing up the local housing strategy. It's a great document. So I will encourage you all to please support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ramesh.
I agree with Councillor Andrew. I think the key priorities are the first 5 strategic priorities. What we are looking at is a City of Bunbury's vision with the mission, to be honest. So I think instead of getting it all diluted with the other discussions about homelessness, domestic violence and safety, we are really looking at what's our key priority area for the next foreseeable future. Whilst the deputation speakers have talked about the sustainability, the homelessness, and various other options, but this covers pretty much the blanket approach of what we are looking at as a city's priorities. And I just think we are we're trying to dilute with multiple words, multiple changes, multiple amendments. This is just the next step ahead. I don't think we should be confusing these issues with what's being proposed. And I would recommend that we should support this City of Bunbury Council's priorities. We should look at the advocacy points and the matters that's related at the second point, the amendments, are an issue to be looked at in depth for the next portion. So I think my support would be to support these recommendations. And I also would like to thank all the speakers for their detailed presentations. Thank you.
Speaker against, Councillor Stick.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. First of all, through you, Mr Mayor, I just want to thank the speakers for this evening and including some of their passionate thoughts for this community. Whilst I also want to thank the staff for their work, and especially the CEO, I just want to let everybody and remind everybody that no decisions are made in workshops, no decisions are made in briefings. Decisions are made here this evening. I also want to state that these are great advocacies. I'm not really saying we're not going around the right direction. What I am saying is, disappointing, the information is not here for the community. We're making a major decision. The information is not here in this document for the community. I'm not saying there hasn't been good work. I'm saying it's not represented. So I'm disappointed about that. The other thing I'm also disappointed about is that I heard on the grapevine about the Bird Wildlife Park, and I also know that it's not this city that's also advocating for it. So being in line with something that I can tell you, Broome went down that path, it didn't work and they closed it. Malcolm Douglas Crocodile Park went down that park and they closed it. You now have to drive out of town to go see it. So having one location that doesn't have a lot of people there and a lot of cafes and shops and other alternative items don't bring tourists. CBDs bring tourists. That's very, very clear. Even the report said that too. And you just have to look at where you go when you visit. You go to specific areas when you go to interstate, overseas, you check out the CBD, you check out the attractions. The attractions are not always in the CBD. But precincts, there's no such thing in a sense, because I don't know about you, but do you go to the botanical gardens? They're not in the CBD. I also just always, when I hear this term, that we're going to downsize people out of their homes and put them into smaller homes, that just gets me furious. You have single women whose husbands have died, they've been living there for maybe 30 or 40 years, and you want to squeeze them out into a home where they do not know the people next door and in the street? Talk about making people live in a little bit of fear. So I don't support that. I also find it particularly offensive when a councillor in this chamber can say, how do you get a domestic violence report? There's that much detail for the CEO.
Point of order.
I'd like that to
Councillor
be
Dillon.
retracted because that wasn't the content of what was meant. Thank you.
I will not retract it because you said it.
Councillor Stack. I think the context from Councillor Turnell that she mentioned was that how is the CEO meant to do something on domestic, it was around the wording. That's clearly what Councillor Turner's intent was and what I saw it as and the CEO saw it as. I'll ask you to continue. You can consider retracting that if you would like.
Well, I heard the word report, and I just need to say to this chamber, there's enough information on reporting out there that I can agree that with the fellow councillor Gassab, it is the number one issue that the federal government is trying to address. And I have been addressing for 30 years. Where else am I not happy with this? I'm not happy with these, As again, I'll just say, I thank everyone for the work, and I'm just saying that there's not enough information for me to support this, because there's so many variables, and to say that the cost of living and having different forms of housing, yes, that's true, but Chewett Brook, yes, we need to bring it on to grow our rate base, that's a fact, right? But it is not a fact to say when we have high inflation and high living costs, it is not true to say that it affects more people everywhere than it does with homeless, single-parent households, low-income families, and there's a lot of them. There's a lot of, parents, two parents working with small children who can't afford to even buy their own home. And it doesn't matter how much housing supply you will give them at this point in time, they don't have the financial assets to do it. And even if the federal government's going to come in with $40,000, all that's going to do is increase the price of housing even further. We already found that out when all the builders put on too much work because there was similar amount of money flying around, and look how many of the builders went bust because they took too much work on and couldn't deliver on what they took the money on. So I won't go on and on and on, because I know that I can, jeepers I can, but I just welcome the number 2 point, and I thank you, Mr Mayor, for that suggestion, and I look forward to the CEO's report, and I hope that all the councillors support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stecker. Is there a speaker for the executive recommendation? Question, Councillor Gassab?
I'd like to speak against, but this looks like there's no opportunity, Mr Mayor, so I'll speak for and possibly vote against. So I did like to highlight some points. So the first one, look, Mr Mayor, we're talking about strategic advocacy priorities. The strategic advocacy priorities, which means that is actually it. It doesn't say some strategic, it's got the strategic, right? If you want to change that to some, I'd probably support it. So how about we do a bit of strategic thinking here tonight? Well, okay, if you're missing the point, that says specifically the strategic, that means singular, the.
Point of order, Mr Mayor, it doesn't say the. Can the councillor please correct it?
What?
I think he's...
Officer comments, it's a request.
Councillor Gassab, take a seat. When a point of orders are called, I will make a ruling on that. I believe Councillor Gassab is referring to the officer comments, the actual obviously motion as you read there, as that council endorsed the City of Bunbury strategic. There's some officer comments around the word the. Nevertheless, I'll allow you to continue, Councillor Gassab, but the actual executive recommendation, which is in front of you, is correct.
Well, I guess I have to take some note of the comments from the officers. Anyway, what I was going to say, how about we do a little bit of strategic thinking here and all support everything on here, everybody, so we don't go half-hearted to the state and federal government. And the only way we can do it very simply by adding 2 or 3 words here and there. So I'm not sure why the pushback, why the reluctance of actually adding homelessness, domestic violence, something about CBD activation and safety. So safety, community safety is number 2 now on the market strategic community survey, strategic community plan. CBD activation is number 1. Previously it was the other way around. Why is it so difficult to add it in there and get full horsepower from this council to approach the federal government? Okay, so I want to clear up the reason I wanted to mention domestic violence. There's misconception out in the community. If you go and talk to people who are making comments or helping the homeless out there, there's misconception that people believe that the homeless cohort are a different sort of cohort. The number 1 cause of homelessness is domestic and family violence. The reason I wanted to suggesting we put it on there, is to highlight to the community that homelessness is impacted by domestic violence. It's not about a separate domestic violence report, and it falls within our advocacy. We're going to advocate for sustainability and zero emission. Yeah, we've had a pretty impressive report. There was peer-reviewed references in there, and comments that once a wind farm is established, it would be easier to expand that. The justification would be easier. So we don't know what we're going to get in the future, right? So, and there's also in the presentation, there was concern raised. So I'm wondering whether we should be considering in this advocacy what our position is, and considering some of the comments that were made. I'm not sure how we're going to advocate for one of the main pieces of energy supply proposals affecting our shore, our ocean out here, without having a proper position, considering what tonight was a very balanced presentation. The other one, I'm not sure I can support this, the second part, in that it says we're going to be asking for funding for BHRC waste management facility as a key regional waste solution. This appears to me to preclude any future potential of privatising that facility. Safety I've covered. Would have been nice to have thrown in education in there, considering 8,000 young people are missing from 102,000 regional population that go and educate themselves elsewhere. So, Mr Mayor, if there's other speakers to the motion, I'd like to be convinced why I should be supporting this without adding a couple of minor words and then get full horsepower behind this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Or at speakers against? Councillor Andrew, to close? Nothing to close, so just to be clear, this is the executive recommendation with point 1 and 2. I'll put that. Those in favour, please indicate. Those against? 2 against, that's carried. Thank you. I think 1 and, I see what you mean. I've taken it now, sorry, Councillor Steck. Sorry, I did clarify beforehand. I think we know that you two both supported part 2, but that was taken and moved now, and it has been dealt with. Thanks, Councillor Steck. We do have an application for leave there from Councillor Quain. Thank you, Councillor Andrew. A seconder. Councillor Ramesh. Councillor Ramesh first. I'll put that. Those in favour, please indicate. That's carried. Thank you. Enjoy, Councillor Quain. And I believe that brings us to a close. Thank you all. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, staff. Thank you, members of the public. Thank you for joining us.